I spent years believing that real love had to hurt, that if it didn't ache, if it didn't leave me awake at 3 a.m. waiting for a message that might never come, then it wasn't love. I was taught, or maybe convinced myself, that the right love would come with a racing heart, intense fights, cinematic reconciliations, whispered promises between tears and breathless kisses. And so I lived, throwing myself entirely into romances that began with promises and ended in silence. My friends said I was intense, passionate, that I felt too much. I smiled as if it were a compliment, but inside, I felt exhausted, as if each relationship tore pieces of me I'd never be able to put back in place. And in the middle of this repeated cycle of illusions and scars, there was always a constant, Ethan. The Ethan of long conversations on the porch. The one who showed up with pizza when my world collapsed. The one who listened to my stories, even when I myself was already tired of them. He never said much, but there was something in the way he was that made me feel less alone. I called him my safe harbor casually, as if it were an inside joke. But the truth is, I never stopped to think about what that really meant. Because I was always looking away, ahead, toward what hadn't arrived yet, without realizing that sometimes love doesn't approach with fanfare. It stays, silent, patient, and only reveals itself when we finally stop running. But back then, I was still running, still convinced that the next encounter, the next mysterious smile, the next "you're different from everyone else" would be the one to change everything. I didn't see the obvious, or maybe I just wasn't ready to admit that what I always searched for was already by my side all this time. The problem with getting used to the extraordinary is that the essential begins to seem invisible. And that's how it was with me. Ethan was the only constant in a life built on bad bets. He was always there, by my side at birthdays forgotten by others, during career crises that made me question everything, during nights when I returned from a failed date and said, with a forced laugh, that at least the food was good. He'd laugh, not to mock, but to remind me I could still laugh, even when everything hurt. And me? I pretended not to see. Or rather, I saw, but I didn't let my heart understand. Because admitting he was what I always needed meant recognizing I'd wasted too much time searching outside for what had already been healing me from within. I remember a specific night. I'd fought with someone who, once again, promised the world and handed me emptiness. I cried so much there was no salt left in my eyes. I called Ethan without thinking. When he answered, he just said, "I'm coming." And 20 minutes later, he was at my door with 2 mugs of hot chocolate and that calm look that said more than any words. We didn't talk much that night. We sat on the couch in silence, him holding my hand like someone holding a cracked vase with the care of knowing the glue is there. It's just a matter of time. It was in moments like these that he loved me, and I didn't see it, because my idea of love was still made of fireworks, not constancy. Everyone around us knew. My friends asked how it was possible I'd never been with Ethan. I'd reply with an automatic laugh, as if dodging a truth I wasn't ready to touch. They'd say he looked at me differently, and he did. But I refused to look back, because if I did, I might see a love so deep, so whole, that it would dismantle all the lies I told myself about what passion was. And maybe, back then, I wasn't ready for that kind of love. The kind that doesn't arrive with promises but with presence. The kind that doesn't trap you, but anchors you. It was only when everything finally collapsed that I began to see clearly. One last romance, more promising than the others, made me believe, once again, that this time it'll work. He was charming, articulate, said the right things, and for a while, I wanted to believe it was real. I wanted it so much that I ignored the signs, the delayed messages, the absences that became routine, until the day I was left waiting at an elegant restaurant with a half-finished glass of wine and my gaze stuck on the door for over an hour. The shame burned, but what truly hurt was the brutal realization I was hurting myself again, alone. Putting myself in the place of waiting, of illusion, of almost. I got home late that night with red eyes and shattered dignity. I entered in silence, left my heels by the door, dropped my purse on the floor. I sat in the dark living room as if surrendering. That's when the doorbell rang. Ethan. He showed up without me saying a word, without needing to ask. He just knew, as he always did. He looked me in the eyes as if he'd seen that version of me before, but still believed there was beauty there. He didn't ask anything. He just sat beside me. And it was there, in the silence of that couch, in the shadow of the disappointment I'd fed myself, that something inside me began to break. But not like before, not into pieces. This time, it felt like a shell cracking open, a covering that, for years, had prevented me from feeling what had always been there. That night, for the first time, I faced Ethan for more than a few seconds. I looked at him like someone rediscovering a familiar place with the eyes of someone who's just arrived. And what I saw wasn't just a friend, not just the safe shoulder or predictable comfort. I saw someone who had loved me for years without ever asking for love in return, someone who stayed even when everything in me said to run. And in that moment, the simplest and most overwhelming question echoed inside me. Why had I never chosen him? After that night, everything continued the same, and yet nothing was the same. Ethan still called with the same humor, still showed up with coffee on Sunday mornings, still laughed at my stories as if he'd never heard them before. But there was something new between us, something I could no longer ignore. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. The way he looked, it me lingered a second longer. The silence between sentences seemed charged with everything we'd never said. And the most unsettling part wasn't him. It was me. Because for the first time, I was paying attention. I began to notice details that had slipped past me before. The way he remembered the names of all my coworkers, even those I'd only mentioned once. The times he stayed silent just to let me speak without hurry, as if my pains deserved time. I started wondering how long he'd been looking at me like that. How long he'd been loving me in silence, asking for nothing in return. And the hardest part was accepting that I was feeling something too, and that maybe I'd felt it for a long time, but had learned to hide it even from myself. The heart, accustomed to getting hurt, fears what is good, what is calm, what doesn't hurt. And it was that fear that made me retreat, even when everything in me wanted to stay closer. I kept acting as usual with jokes and rehearsed smiles, but inside, a storm took over me. I thought of him before sleeping, replayed every touch, every word, every old memory with a new lens, and yet I felt trapped, not by him but by myself, because admitting that love meant acknowledging I'd been blind for too long. And I didn't know if I was ready to face that. But the truth was, with each passing day, Ethan was less just my friend, and more the love I'd always dreamed of but never had the courage to accept. Days turned into an emotional minefield. Every simple gesture from Ethan, holding the door for me, remembering I liked my coffee with a pinch of cinnamon, sending me songs that seemed to describe my mood without a word, gained a weight that dismantled me inside. I began avoiding him without realizing it, making up silly excuses not to go out, replying to messages late, trying to build a wall where for years there had only been shelter. It was a ridiculous defense. But how do you face someone who has always loved you with such clarity when you yourself spent so long looking the wrong way? It was like fearing to turn on the light and finally see the mess I had created. Ethan noticed, of course. He always did. He didn't push, didn't ask. He just gave me space. But there was a silence in his eyes that had never been there before, as if he knew I was fighting with myself, and that this battle had to be mine. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me from afar, with that expression mixing tenderness and pain. It was as if he were saying, "I'm still here." But for how long? And that tore me apart, because I knew that if I waited too long, he'd leave, not with anger, not with resentment, but with the dignity of someone who loved without being loved, back for too long. It was in this limbo that I began revisiting our memories, like flipping through an old album, but now with more attentive eyes. I remembered the time he drove 4 hours just to pick me up when my car broke down. The day he sat with me at the hospital until I received the results of a test that kept me awake. The notes left on the door. The silent hugs. The times he saw me shattered and treated me as if I were whole. And then I realized what I'd searched for in others, security, care, truth, had always been there, right beside me. But I was too busy chasing what glittered quickly, without realizing the brightest light was the one that never dimmed. And this understanding crushed me, because with it came guilt. Guilt for not seeing sooner, for not caring for him as he cared for me, for possibly waking up too late. Something small happened, but it turned me inside out. A message, short, direct, from Ethan. "I'm going away for a few days. I need some time for myself. Take care." That's all. No drama, no explanations, no pleas. Just a silent distancing from someone who, after waiting for years, had begun to understand that maybe his love would never be seen the way he felt it. And in that moment, with my phone still in hand, a deep anguish took over me. It wasn't missing him. It was despair. As if, for the first time, his absence had weight, as if the real possibility of losing him ripped the ground from under me. I spent the following days in a state of alert I remembered from past bad breakups, but with a brutal difference. With Ethan, I wasn't losing a fleeting romance. I was about to lose my foundation, my home. The man who always knew who I was, even when I did everything to hide myself. And what hurt most was knowing that this time there was no one to blame but myself. I who didn't see. I who ran. I who protected myself so much from old wounds that I almost let slip away the purest love life had given me. It was only in the silence of the house, in the days when the phone didn't ring, that I understood the gravity of what was happening. I began recalling the last times he looked at me and saw a new weariness, a quiet sadness. He still loved me, I knew, but love also needs to breathe, needs to be welcomed. And I'd never given him that space, never said the words he needed to hear, never looked at him with the same courage he'd had all these years looking at me. And then, on a night when the world seemed frozen, I sat on the bed, held my own hand as he used to when the world broke me, and finally let the tears come. Not out of regret, but because finally I was ready to admit I loved him, had always loved him. I just didn't know that's what it was. There was no magical revelation, no immediate answer to my new understanding, just silence, that kind of silence that doesn't scream but weighs and is only filled by action. In the days that followed, I felt each absence of Ethan like an echo. The bench at the cafe where we used to sit felt emptier. The absence of his notifications on my phone left an almost physical space on the screen. The funny messages, the reminders to take care of myself, even the long voice notes about nothing, all gone. And in this emptiness, I realized how much he was part of my life, not as an accessory, but as essence. I got into the car one cloudy afternoon, without exact plans. I only knew I needed to see him. I went to the place he used to go when he needed silence, a modest country house he inherited from his grandfather. I drove with a racing heart, unsure if he'd be there. But deep inside, an old wise part of me said yes, that he hadn't given up yet. And when I parked in front of the worn porch, there he was, facing away with a mug in his hands, watching the horizon as if conversing. With his own past, I got out slowly. Each step was a mix of fear and hope. He turned when he heard my footsteps, and for a moment, everything stopped. There was no anger in his eyes, no accusation, just surprise and a kind of calm pain, as if he loved me but didn't know if he could wait anymore. I stood there before him without a script, without rehearsed excuses. And when his eyes filled with tears just from seeing me there, I knew with every cell in my body I couldn't live another day without saying what needed to be said. I don't remember exactly the words I used, only that my voice trembled and my chest felt too small to hold everything I needed to say. I apologized. Not for not having loved, but for taking so long to understand what true love was. I told him I saw now, that I knew now. I spoke of the times he protected me without saying anything, of the nights he rebuilt me with his presence, of the memories that now burned, just knowing I'd never reciprocated as he deserved. I told him I was scared, yes, scared I'd arrived too late, scared I'd never be able to love as well as he'd loved me, but that even so I was there, whole, without excuses, without escape. Ethan listened in silence, as he always did. His eyes filled with tears, but he never looked away. When I said, "I love you," he took a deep breath. It was as if all the air between us had been suspended until that moment, and then he spoke. In a low voice, as if trying to control an emotion too old to be contained, he said he'd loved me since the day he first saw me, that he loved without hope, but never without faith, that he thought he'd learned to live with that silent love until it began to hurt too much, and that hearing me say it now made it all worth it, even the wait, even the pain. We hugged there, under the overcast evening sky, like people finding each other after years of war. And that's exactly what it was. I had fought against myself for too long, but in that embrace, I surrendered. Not to another, but to love. To the love that is simple, steady, constant. To the love that had always been by my side, waiting for the right moment to be accepted. We went home that same night. The drive was silent, but a different silence, full of presence, peace, of everything left unsaid because, deep down, it had already been felt. Ethan drove with a tranquility I'd never noticed before, or maybe only now could see. And me, for the first time in a long time, felt no rush, no urgency. I felt belonging, and that was the biggest change. The love that once made me run, beg, plead for attention, now made me take a deep breath and feel that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The days that followed weren't filled with fireworks. They were filled with details, waking up and finding coffee ready in the kitchen, sharing the silence of mornings without discomfort, walking side by side on the street and holding his hand naturally, as if that gesture had always been part of me. There were no promises of eternity. There was commitment to the present, and that was more than enough. Because the love that grows slowly is the one that lasts. Some friends commented that it took a while, huh? As if love had a clock everyone had to follow. But I just smiled, because only I knew what it took to get there. Only I knew how much I had to lose myself, break, rebuild, and finally have the courage to look sideways and see, at last, that love wasn't absent. It was patient, and that, even tired, it chose to stay. Not because I asked, but because it was real. Today, when I look at Ethan, I don't just see the man who loved me silently for years. I see the home that waited for me. I see the truth that endured. And above all, I see the victory of love that didn't need to shout to be heard, because love won. The moment I finally had the courage to accept what had always been by my side. Years have passed since that reunion, and sometimes I still catch myself wondering what my life would have been like if I'd seen it sooner. But that question no longer hurts. It teaches me. Because some loves aren't born at the right time. They're born when we're ready. And I needed many stumbles, many illusions, and many goodbyes to understand that true love doesn't arrive on a white horse or explode like a movie scene. It arrives as Ethan did, slowly, discreetly, but whole. And it stays even when you take too long to open the door. Today we live a simple life, and in this simplicity lies what's most valuable. We share books, silences, recipes that never turn out right. We still argue about where to leave the keys, or who forgot to close the gate. But even in those moments there's love. Because now, I don't love with doubt. I love with presence, with choice, with maturity, with that peace that comes from knowing that finally I stopped running. Sometimes before sleep, he holds my hand as he did back then, on the days I was in pieces. And now I squeeze back, not as someone needing rescue, but as someone wanting to say, I see you. Because truly seeing is what changes everything. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that love doesn't need to be found. Sometimes it just needs to be accepted. And when that happens, love wins, in silence, with depth, forever.